Hello, everyone. This is Ben Norton with the Grayzone, and this is a special interview about an important political event that's coming up on November 3rd. Of course, everyone around the world is talking about the US presidential election that's coming up on that same date between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And we at the Grayzone have been reporting from Bolivia on the historic landslide election victory there of the Movement Towards Socialism party of Evo Morales. But there's another issue that's getting very little attention, but I also think is very important, and that is a referendum in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is, of course, a U.S. colony. It has been a U.S. colony since the Spanish American War of 1898. And yet, a lot of people, including myself, I don't think we focus enough on the struggle in Puerto Rico, including, we at the Grayzone, we do a lot of reporting on Latin America and on U.S. imperialism in Latin America, focusing on Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other countries. But in the United States, there is a colony in Latin America, Puerto Rico, in which people do not have the same rights as other citizens of the continental United States, in which their political rights are denied, and in which, as we'll talk about in this interview, they have really no economic rights. Their economy is controlled by the US federal government through an unelected economic control board. So to discuss the upcoming election and referendum on November 3rd, we are joined by Andrés González Berdecía. He is an activist and a politician with the Puerto Rican Independence Party, and in fact, he's a senatorial candidate from the capital, San Juan, for the Puerto Rican Independence Party. Thanks for joining us, Andrés. Let's just begin. Can you talk about what this referendum is and what exactly it means for the people of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really great talking to you. I followed your work for the last couple of months, years, and I really appreciate what you do. When I was growing up, it wasn't easy to hear or see people from the United States speaking about foreign policy of the United States the way that you guys are doing it. So it's really a joy to have independent journalism like yours. So yeah, like you said, this November 3rd, we have our own elections here, although we're a colony, like you correctly stated. We have elections to elect a government here, although we are subordinated to Congress's plenary powers, and we're actually right now under a supervisory control board, which here we call the Junta de Control Fiscal. We in Latin America know a lot about juntas, so we have our own now. um, but like you said, uh, over the we could say since the invasion 1898, there have been this would be the sixth plebiscite or referendum regarding the status. So they have been different over the years, right? We have one after the adoption of the creation, the fake creation of what we call the Estado Libre Asociado in 52. There was one in 1967. There was also one in 19 after that, 1993, 1998, and this century we've had one in 2012 and 2017. So if I didn't skip one of them, this would be the sixth. So the question here is whether we Puerto Ricans would like to would favor statehood, yes or no. That's the question, right? So our position has been, for many decades, we in the Puerto Rican Independence Party and most independent forces in Puerto Rico have agreed that the preferable way to handle the situation, here would be through a constitutional convention, what we call una asamblea constitucional de estatus, right? Um, Institutions here like El Colegio de Abogados and other institutions over the years have agreed with that position. We believe it's the perhaps more serious way to handle it by people who have their representation there over a long period of time in order to discuss what each group decides or believes would be best, and so that it could be binding by Congress and we can finally deal with this situation here. But the New Progressive Party, which is the annexation party, and also one might say the most right wing, but I wouldn't be so sure about that, because as you correctly stated, there are some similarities, although not perfectly, between our parties here and you could say the Republican and Democratic Party in the United States. In respect that with respect that in many areas, especially economic policy, they're both very very right wing. So the government here adopted as a strategy in order, because they've been so unpopular. We if you know, and your audience knows, that we expelled the actual elected governor here, Ricardo Rosselló, in 2019. So they devised this strategy to get their own people to go to the polls, and once there, hopefully vote for them. And they approved this referendum, right? Our position is that although this is not the best way that we would have hoped, and although the American government already try to not they se lavaron las manos, as we say, they washed their hands and said, like, well, this is not what we want. um, Nevertheless, as a political, once approved by our government, the political question is whether we would, take that advantage and use it, or we would, as we have done in the past, sometimes for other reasons, not participate. And we decided that, what, if you want to make that question, we independentistas, and even other forces in Puerto Rico, even those who, for some crazy reason, would like the colony, or some sort of real free association, then let's band together, and for different reasons we will go to the polls, and we will defend the independence option, which we believe is our natural right, as a nation, and it's the option that would allow us to take control of our future, in order to make our quality of life here in Puerto Rico better, in order to protect, both our resources, but also our, sporting sovereignty and identical, identity, and other things that we believe are very important to us. So that's where we're going. In order, we're making the campaign for the no option, which is the no to statehood.
Yeah, thanks for describing all of that, Andres. Also, you are a candidate in the upcoming election for Senate. You're a candidate, of course, for the Puerto Rican Independence Party. And a colleague of yours, Adriana Gutierrez Colon, who is the co-host of your radio program, Radio Independencia, or Independence Radio, she's also a senatorial candidate from the Puerto Rican Independence Party. For anyone who speaks Spanish who's listening to this or watching this interview, I would highly recommend checking out their radio show, Radio Independencia. It's the indispensable show to understand what's going on locally in Puerto Rico and in the independence movement. But Andres, can you talk about why the two of you are running for the Senate? You're using the slogan, Ocupemos el Senado, let's occupy the Senate. So why are you running? And also, why are you supporters of independence? Why are you independentistas?
All right. So since a very young age, I've admired the Puerto Rican Independence Party, and you could say that I grew up. Although in Puerto Rico, in our families, everybody has people from all sorts of with all sorts of ideologies and views regarding status and regarding everything else, right? But since a very young age, I just couldn't understand how we could, in Puerto Rico, be a colony, right? And back then, people still didn't acknowledge it. Besides, outside the independence movement, they said that the Commonwealth was still sovereign, which is crazy for us now. But that's the way I grew up. But I just couldn't understand how there was a federal courts. There were federal courts in Puerto Rico, so we had judges appointed or imposed, as I would say, by a president and a senate, in which we're not represented and in which we have no vote. And I couldn't understand how federal law could apply in Puerto Rico if Congress said so, even though, again, we don't have Congress people. And to me, besides the national element, as I've always understood myself as part of a nation, neither better nor worse, than the U.S. Right? It's not a nationalist, xenophobic nationalism. It's we're part of the the presence of the American government in Puerto Rico is part of American imperialism and part of white Anglo-Saxon imperialism that we in Latin America know very well, right? So that's as in the origin, I always favor that option. But you could say, and I've always been very political. I studied political science. I studied law, but in 2016, many things happened, and well, one of them was the important case of Sanchez Valle. Perhaps we don't have the enough time to go over it, but the Supreme Court of the United States, for the first time ever, stated because they handle a double jeopardy case, and you might say, what does that have to do with status in Puerto Rico? But everything, because they had to decide whether, for the double jeopardy clause purposes, Puerto Rico was sovereign, so that one government, the federal government, could prosecute someone after Puerto Rico and vice versa. And in order to answer that, they actually stated, that regardless of the Constitution, Puerto Rico was, of course, a territory, and the sovereignty of Puerto Rico lies in federal soil, which it's incredible because it hurts, but it's a validation of what we alone as a minority in the independence movement have stated, as a matter of logic and common sense forever. But for the Popular Democratic Party and colonialists in Puerto Rico and many annexation forces, it's like, they told you, and it's very different when I say it as, when the Supreme Court of the United States says it. So I was actually there working in Washington when that happened, when they handed down the opinion. And 1 week later, the Congress, you walk to the other street, and Congress adopted Promesa, which is the crazy law. Again, we would need another show for that. For the first time, well, not for the first time, but clearly using the Congress's plenary power under the territorial clause of the Constitution in order to impose a junta de control fiscal composed of 7 people, mostly even, right wing. This was Obama, but it even kind of gave, Republicans control. So they imposed a 7 people control board, and any of course, we don't vote for them, that has the ability of literally shutting down laws of the Puerto Rican legislature and many other powers that we supposedly had under this, our colonial government. So that happened. And, then came the Junta de Control Fiscal and all that. I worked at the Attorney General's office here. But I said, like, I can't do this. I wrote to the Puerto Rican Independence Party new representative, and I say, well, you don't know me, but if there's any way that I could help, I really respect the work that you do. And I was given the opportunity, and that's when I officially got into the party, one might say. And I've been seeing the work that they've been doing, and I'm, when they approached me later on, I said, of course, there's a lot of young people supporting it, because we understand that the work that the party has done without virtues and defects, we've been the only pro-independence and left-wing political institution able to survive for the past 70 years electorally with the problems that we've had. Well, we've been here. So I was very excited and very, very humbled by the opportunity, and that's why I did it. And I do it because I believe it's now more important than ever, because it's actually a matter of democracy. It's not. We are very progressive, and that's why I also favor it, and that's the policies that I would advance. But here, the colonialism. The thing is that we don't have the power to decide whether we want to be left wing or right wing. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow we could go into power, and the 100% of the Puerto Rican people and the government could adopt the best, I don't know, socialist state, or the best neoliberal, whatever you want to call it, state. It doesn't matter if Congress can actually shut it down, with a bill. So that's why now more than ever, it's very important to take action, and recognizing that we have structural limitations with what we can do, right? Because I've just described the problems that structurally we have. But still, some of those governments that we've had that have imposed neoliberal policies in Puerto Rico, both from the Puerto Rican, the PNP, New Progressive Party, and the Popular Democratic Party, they got there by vote. So we can take them out through the vote, just like we expel the governor in the streets. So that's why our campaign, the slogan, mine and Adriana's, it's Ocupemos el Senado, right? Like just like we occupy the streets, let's occupy the Senate, because we offer more than 1,000 candidates all over Puerto Rico, more than all 57 legislative positions we offer, and I strongly believe that it would be a very different Puerto Rico if we had the opportunity to at least have the will, have the opportunity to put some control and to confront these institutions that are there, and that these colonial parties just go with. They don't even confront things like the Junta de Control Fiscal. The Promesa says that we have to pay for their budget. And these parties, these governments, through this last 3 years, they've actually given 80 million, $50 million in order to finance the Junta de Control Board that is imposing all these neoliberal measures. So we can take, do something about that. And that's what we're telling our people to do.
Well, you raised some really important points there, Andres, and actually this is a good segue because I was going to ask you about the policies toward Puerto Rico of the Donald Trump administration and how they differ, if any, with the Barack Obama administration. You mentioned promesa. This is the nice sounding bill passed by the Obama administration. It means promise in Spanish, but what it really was is a kind of neo-colonial takeover of Puerto Rico's economic sovereignty. The US federal government, under a Democratic administration, the Obama White House, pushed this legislation that appoints an unelected fiscal control board filled mostly by people who are not Puerto Rican nationals, who know nothing about the island, and who control all of its finances, all of its economic policy. So even if even if the Puerto Rican Independence Party won every seat in the Senate and in the House and the governorship, they still couldn't control their own economics. It's similar to what happened in Detroit. Some of our viewers and listeners might know that Detroit, the city, went bankrupt, and the U.S. federal government imposed a fiscal control board, which is unelected and which controls the largely black city's finances. I mean, it's a really racist and almost kind of internal colonial policy. But what fewer people know is that that exact same policy is, at an even worse level, is currently being enacted inside Puerto Rico. And the name of it is the junta, like a dictatorship. So can you explain what the policies of the Obama administration were and what the policies of the Trump administration have been? Because, of course, it's easy to criticize Trump, and there have been a lot of people, I think, for partisan reasons, who have finally started talking about Puerto Rico, Democrats and liberals, who ignored Puerto Rico under Obama, but now that Trump is in office, they're criticizing his policies. So do you all in Puerto Rico, do you see many differences between the current U.S. government policy now toward Puerto Rico under Trump and the policies that were going on under Obama?
Yeah, you're totally right, and that's a great question. We have to understand that you know right now Puerto Rico is used, as we say in Spanish, as a balón político, right? It's a political token that some Democrats and a lot of people are using right now. But in Puerto Rico, again, we've been a colony of the United States since 1898. We're talking about 122 years, and throughout that history, when I look at the Organic Acts, 1917. And then the Commonwealth and a lot of things that have happened, of course, over democratic administrations. And let's not even go into the application of Cointelpro in Puerto Rico too, through las carpetas, right? 48 for 50 years of political persecution, official political persecution against left-wing groups and independentistas specifically. Let's forget all that, but you just, in more and more.
Well, actually, Andres, sorry to cut you off there, but we should talk about that. Let's talk about COINTELPRO and the outrageous counterinsurgency campaign waged by the U.S. government against Puerto Rican independence leaders. People might know about the assassination by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department of Fred Hampton, the Chicago chair of the Black Panther Party. But what's less known is the brutally violent and repressive counterinsurgency campaign against Puerto Rican independence supporters. Of course, the most famous Puerto Rican independence leader, Albizu Campos, was likely tortured in prison. He was likely a subject of testing by U.S. radiation and died because of complications. And then the U.S. government under Bill Clinton later admitted that the U.S. federal government did forms of biological experimentation on Puerto Ricans, including radiation. So it's very likely that they killed the most important Puerto Rican independence leader. And then there are other violent forms of repression against other independence supporters. So can you just address some of that history here?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and sometimes people think, don't like it when we talk about history, but if you really want to understand what has happened to Puerto Rico, and you might ask yourself genuinely, like, well, so why are there no more, why are there so few or whatever? Well, you have to understand the history. And for the first, let's say 60 years or something, one might say definitely the first 52 years of the occupation here, the strongest parties, el Partido Unión, later on Partido Liberal, of course, el Partido Nacionalista, Albizu Campos in the 30s later, and even the Popular Democratic Party, which is the most colonialist party in the creator of the Commonwealth, they were all either exclusively pro-independence or they had independence as one of their adopted options, right? And of course, over that period, no no referendums were ever held, to decide Puerto Rico's future. Not only that, we've had a lot of, you can look up, La Masacre de Rio Piedras, La Masacre de Ponce, and a lot of instances. In fact, in Puerto Rico, we had literally military governors imposed by the president. We didn't vote for the governor here until 1948, which, it was imposed by the president, right? Until 1917, we had like the Cámara de Delegados, which would be fairly a House of Representatives, where we have the Consejo Ejecutivo, which was sort of it was half imposed by the president or almost all imposed by the president. It wasn't even elected, and the governor was not elected. So, when you talk about democracy in Puerto Rico for those 57 years of occupation, it's really, quite comical. But when we adopted the Constitution in 1958, the falsity, the lie was that it all changed, and we were taken off the list of colonies list from the UN and all that, and and everything was beautiful, right? But of course, that didn't happen because constitutionally we remained an unincorporated territory, which is a term that this CODIS invented, right? It was not in the Constitution. It's just invented by the same people that decided the Dred Scott case, almost literally, and literally the people that decided Plessy. And if you go through those pages, you will see I'm not exaggerating. They actually talk about imperialism and white supremacy and why we were not fit under to be part of. We actually still to this day under this Supreme Court of the United States, we actually belong to but are not a part of the United States, and that's complicated because one. And I want to get to this later. How one might naturally say, "Oh, that's this." How can that be? Of course, you're U.S. Yeah, but the solution to colonialism is self-determination, and in our view, independence. It's not necessarily full annexation, right? So that's something that we can get into later. But I just want to point out that we've had that history, right? So Albizu Campos was probably the most important independence figure, maybe ever, but definitely through the first half of the 20th century. And there was actually today, when the day we're recording this, we commemorate 70 years of what is called here La Revolución del 50, or La Revolución de Jayuya, right? There was actually a revolution in 1950 organized by the Nationalist Party opposing what was the beginning of the falsity known as the Commonwealth. And there were actions both in many cities here in Puerto Rico, but also in Washington. And that's part of the history. So here, through that time, after that, and we could say today we could still, but it's it's not the same. But until the 80s, 90s, so we had the application of what you might know as Cointelpro there, against left-wing groups. But here, you could talk about a double whammy because we had that persecution of what we call las carpetas, which is that so Andres went to the university to a meeting. So somebody actually followed you, and they opened up a file, a carpeta, and said, well, that day. So there was a lot of that. They created a lot of course, of rumors against, try to divide, and actually divided many independentistas. We, of course, were not that made it more difficult for people to get into schools, to get jobs, and basically they criminalized, the independentismo. It was a synonym of, criminals. But I say it's a double whammy because of what very well, the history of Latin America, because of what we've had to deal with the American government. So we were also equated with communism, which I have no problem with that, but still it's not the same thing. And you might perfectly well believe in a capitalist society as an independentista, but here in Puerto Rico, like even now, people, it's just you're one of them. You're one of those pelus, right? You're one of those people with long hair. Like they don't communism and independentista. They're pretty much treated like the same thing. And what people know is that it's just bad. So you might understand how during the 50s, after when the Cold War began, to have a territory, to have military bases just beside Cuba, to have a counter Cuba, to have a small possession, small island to be able to use as an example of liberty and the strengths of capitalism, as opposed to, the devilish Castro regime in Cuba, you could see how that fit perfectly into their narrative, right? And that's, some of the things that we've had to deal with over the years. That's pretty much a summary of some of the history that we've had to go through.
Well, thanks for describing that history. And actually, Andres, we'd love to have you back sometime in the future to talk more about that colonial history. I have to say, we as U.S. citizens who are non-Puerto Rican, I think we have a major responsibility to learn about this colonial history because it really affects the present day so much, and many of those policies continue. But sorry for cutting you off earlier. I'm glad we had that segue, but let's go back to the original question. Do you see many differences between the policies of a Democratic and a Republican administration in the US? Of course, under Trump, the racism has become very blatant. There was a kind of latent racism under Obama, but it's all out in the open with a bullhorn now under Trump. He even recently said that he was going to consider selling Puerto Rico. And I mean, the colonial hubris is disgusting. It just shows that it's just a colonial possession for him. But when it comes to actual policy, though, ignoring the rhetoric, do you see differences, significant differences in the policies between the Trump and Obama administrations vis-a-vis Puerto Rico?
Yeah, the correct answer, I think the only answer to that question from somebody who's serious about it is no. I mean, and you made it easily, you made it easy for me when you say big, you said big. Of course, Trump is, you one could argue a class of its own. He's a, we all know he's a racist. We all know, right? But it's easy to criticize Trump. Who doesn't criticize Trump, right? I mean, there are people, but in fact, colonialism is a crazy thing. I mean, the governor of Puerto Rico, the unelected governor, has actually endorsed him, and we have people, and one might think like, why? How come a Puerto Rican? Well, it works like that. But Trump, yeah, of course, he's a caricature, and he's done a lot of things uh, to insult us, yes, but policy wise, as you know very well, this is a this is has been going on for way too long, and those interests have been served, the ones I just described, by all, even people like, of course, Kennedy and all those, supposedly, and let's say liberal, because of course they weren't socialists. I enjoy the way that politics are being described now in the United States, the progressive movement and all. You might not talk about socialism, you might, but of course that CNN, MSNBC, Hillary Clinton, all those people who were doing when I was growing up, like the left on the United States, that's kind of crazy. So they, of course, with policy-wise, have not. They have all, with those that respect us, supposedly the best thing that they do is that they will respect the will of the majority of the Puerto Rican people. And now, after many years, some people are starting to talk about colonialism, but it doesn't come with anything concrete, with anything real. Like, if you're the metropolitan now here, especially the annexation forces, joined us in using the word colony, right? But if you truly believe that you're a colony and you have the power, which we do not, like in Puerto Rico, like, then do something about it. The recognition that you're a colony comes with the obligation to do something about it. You just can't say, well, whatever. And they don't. Just like the United States, people, they just don't talk about it. And when they talk about it, they don't seem to understand that it's your responsibility as a metropolitan state to end what is internationally illegal, and what is, it's just incredible that you would say that under your constitution you can have territories forever, and that congresses can have plenary powers over them and do with them whatever they want. It's not just about, well, when they decide, I'll do what I want to do. From our point of view, you have an obligation to do so, and both parties have done that. You made the perfect example, Obama. One, if you want to differentiate, a threat likely, one might say, well, Obama did some things good or bad until he pardoned Oscar Lopez Rivera, a political prisoner in Puerto Rico for 30, not a Puerto Rican political prisoner for over 36 years, right, for fighting for independence. I cannot say one thing that he had done, very truly good thing that he had done for Puerto Rico. And especially, he came here like every politician, spent like 1 hour and got $200,000 from his people, and then went. So policy wise, he had done nothing. So the best example is that in Puerto Rico, yes, we amounted, because of things that you said, congressionally exempted, triple exempted bonds, that because of congressional action, not our actions. And yes, because of bad administrations from the right wing parties here, we amounted a huge debt that we obviously cannot pay now without, making people like me and everybody leave the Puerto Rico. Um, so we had that. The Popular Democratic Party, the most colonial party, at least last term, they tried to they adopted what we called here a ley de quiebra criolla. Let's say a Puerto Rican bankruptcy statute, right? As a lawyer, when I heard that, I was like, the bankruptcy, I mean, that's like the quintessential occupied, what do you call it, preempted, area of federal law. Like, that's federal, but whatever, they did so. They were challenged by all creditors, bondholders, and everybody. And long story short, that was the other case that the Supreme Court decided. They declared it unconstitutional. But what happened? Why did we have to do that? You mentioned Detroit. It's similar, but it's not the same. So the bankruptcy code in the United States, it has something that's called Chapter 9, right? Municipalities of the United States, not states, can use the federal framework in order to restructure their debts. So the court decided, and decided correctly, because I just can't change what they decided correctly, in the sense that, yes, Congress tried to do that. Whether they could do that, that's another question, right? Or should under the Constitution. But they did statutorily say the following: Puerto Rico can neither, we're going to preempt the field. They can neither create their own bankruptcy statute, but we are excluding them from Chapter 9. So they cannot, their municipalities can't restructure their debt. So that is why, supposedly, right, if you ask Obama and liberals and the good people, so they imposed promesa in order to help us. But the thing is, they could have, with one stroke easily, first, they could have amended the bankruptcy code easily, right? 1 second. And people here don't even, because in Puerto Rico, some people buy this, this argument, but they could have done that. They could have amended the bill to say, well, you can restructure your own debt, right? Allow the Puerto Rican ley de quiebra criolla. They didn't do that. But not only did they create a special sort of framework, that, again, they could have done under their, because they exercise their sovereignty over Puerto Rico. And I mean Congress. But with that came the junta de control fiscal, because, they treat us as this bunch of savages, or I don't know, the mindset that they. So yes, you're gonna, for the first time, you're gonna restructure your debt, but I am going to restructure the debt, meaning 7 people unelected, with all these conditions, including, that I have to watch your budgets every single year, that I can shut down laws, and fiscally I can do pretty much whatever I want. And this has been challenged, and they have been deemed to be officials of the Commonwealth, right? They don't even treat it, for many reasons, as officers of the United States. It's like, and even it's colonialism is weird, because then I really like constitutional law, right? But it's one thing, the application of constitutional law, even in places of the United States, and you might argue, states' powers versus federal power. But the application of that in Puerto Rico is just crazy, because you don't have the element of the vote, right? So I just want to say that the discussions that we might have regarding some boards or in other circumstances might shed light over what's going on here, but also are quite differently. So policy-wise, I cannot say that they've been very different. The only difference that I can honestly say regarding not their treatment, but the way that Puerto Rico is being talked about, is that while I was growing up, and maybe for 20 years, Puerto Rico probably was not an issue that you heard almost, you didn't hear it in the United States mainstream. I would say since we fought to get the Navy out of Vieques, late 90s, beginning of the century. After that, here, everybody thought, well, they're pretty good. They're American citizens, this and that. But with what I've described, promesa, the debt, the hurricanes, and now Trump, we've become, balón político, but it's used mainly now. Many Democrats and liberals are using it as, well, we have to give equality to the American citizens residing in Puerto Rico, which is, of course, an insult for us, because that's not the point. Yes, we are American citizens because in 1917, Congress imposed it on us. People here would not say imposed, maybe, but that's the way it happened. The Cámara de Delegados and José de Diego, actually, it is said that they actually passed a resolution protesting that, because they not because they hated it, but because they said, like, this is not solving colonialism, which of course it didn't, right? So I didn't want to end this opportunity, right? And I have more time, and we don't have to end it, but to say that now what my fear for over the last couple of years is this situation, in a very strange way, the way that we're being talked about in the United States for purely political reasons, because some liberal groups might want to, influence the Latino vote there, the Puerto Ricans that reside in the United States, or Americans of Puerto Rican origin that reside in the United States, and they believe that everybody in Puerto Rico wants statehood, which is also false. They use it and they immediately go to, yes, we have to give equal, which is something that now Obama says and everybody says, equal treatment to the American citizens residing in Puerto Rico. But that's the judicialización. They're like judicializing, making, legalizing, if you will, something that is, of course, a political matter. It of course has to do with individual rights also, but there is no right to statehood, and this is a matter of colonialism, right? And we treat colonialism with the ways that the international law and everybody treats colonialism, not by culminating, from our point of view, what has been the American empire project in Puerto Rico. And what we believe, of course, is if the U.S. is actually willing to is open to that idea, then we should have a real discussion and decide whether Puerto Ricans want it or not, meaning the statehood. But if not, then the default can be to exercise sovereignty over us forever. From our point of view, the solution is obvious. If you don't want to, are not willing to give equal treatment and with all, that comes with that, then of course recognize our national sovereignty and stop imposing your institutions over us. That's our point of view, and a personal goal, a personal political goal for me over the past few years, is to be able to talk with journalists and media outlets such as yours, especially from a more progressive view, because I've heard, and people very progressive, this sort of mindset, and it's in a very strange way now, what we might call some leftists, bona fide leftists in the United States and even socialists are sort of the best allies that the Puerto Rican right has here, because not with bad faith, but because they might not understand the full nature, the complexity of the situation, especially when independentistas have pretty much been exclusively the left in Puerto Rico, and we have much more in common with this, you might call it new left, or very real progressive United States people in the United States. And I really think that we should talk to each other, right? So because it brings me, it's hard, and it would be a shame if the best people, that the political candidates that the U.S. is now providing didn't understand this very well. And I think there have been improvements in the last perhaps 2 or 3 years regarding this matter.
Absolutely. Well, anyone who follows the Grayzone knows what we think about the so-called leftists who are really pro-imperialist. We spent a lot of time exposing them and how there's this attempt to rebuild a kind of social democratic progressive movement that is also pro-imperialist, sometimes more pro-imperialist than even the right wing. And also, I have to say, the fact that the official Puerto Rican government uses the term junta to refer to this unelected body that controls its finances, I mean, it's really Orwellian for me. It's truly dystopian. For people who are listening or watching and don't speak Spanish, a junta is usually used to refer to a military dictatorship. So after there's a military coup, the junta is the regime that governs the country. But what's incredible is in Puerto Rico, if you go to the official website of the management board, the supervisory board that the U.S. federal government imposed over this colony, the official URL for the government website has junta in it. They call it a junta. I mean, it's truly shocking. But this is actually a really good segue to what I wanted to ask you. And, you raised a lot of good points about how similar the policies of the Obama and Trump administrations were. Of course, under Trump, it just becomes so blatant, the racism. There's that scandal after Hurricane Maria where thousands of Puerto Ricans died and it got buried. It actually got covered up. I mean, it was a huge scandal. And then Trump, who refused to give aid to the island, Trump went and he threw paper towels. I mean, it was so disgusting. But again, we can't get distracted by the spectacle. We need to focus on the policy. And the reality is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of people on the left who are progressives, even those of Puerto Rican descent in the United States, who will talk about what Trump did and some of these policies and the austerity and the poverty and the death, but who never raise the possibility of independence. And I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm wondering what you think about probably the most famous U.S. politician of Puerto Rican descent, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
No, you can go ahead, man. I'm not. I can answer whatever. Really, no problem.
Yeah, well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious what you think about her. And, she's someone who's very progressive. She's called herself at certain moments a democratic socialist, although, her commitment to socialism is very dubious, I'll put it that way. But, AOC, she'll sometimes talk about her Puerto Rican identity, but I've never heard her talk about the colonial status of Puerto Rico, and I've never heard her call for independence. So what do you all think?
Yeah, so I think she's changed her position a little. When she, let's say 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I think I heard her speak in that sense, like equality and statehood. But I know for a fact that people have, made some work over the last couple of years, and she's definitely switched, and she's turned a little bit into a we have to. She uses the right words in now, I believe, in saying that, well, we have to, what we need is a process of self-determination for the Puerto Rican people. Notice that, and I could talk about Elizabeth Warren, which I'm not saying it's the same league, right? But she repeated what every other politician with two fingers in front, what as we say here, repeats when they when their aides, when their advisors when they're going to Puerto Rico, and an aide says, well, this is what you have to say, and they say, of course we will respect what the majority of the Puerto Rican people think, whatever. So, but the thing is, most even first, Congress people of Puerto Rican descent, some favors statehood, some favor. Most have been joined with the Popular Democratic Party and not dealing with the issue, and they are perfectly colonial, right? Now, the fact is, there haven't been a lot of truly leftist people like that, right? But I saw AOC and other supposedly progressive outlets engaging in this sort of narrative rhetoric, and some of them, a lot of them, are just it's a matter that they don't understand either the Puerto Rican left or the independence movement. And it's not really, I mean, let's tell the truth, we have a responsibility in Puerto Rico, and everybody, to understand this. They should understand it, most of them, because they also have responsibility. But not everybody has to know about every issue. I'm sure if you ask me about issues of American Samoa, or many other places, I would be ignorant as to those issues. And it's a reality, right? But those people, many of them have an agenda. First of all, most of them are not pro-independence, and they so they have no reason to do it. Another important aspect: we independence movement, because of all the things that we've discussed, we don't pay for these people's campaigns, right? And we're not those parties, and our leaders are not the one going to Congress begging for things or in exchange for things. We didn't give those 1 cent to those. I said about the $200,000 or so that Obama came here for 1 hour, and he talked about Jose Juan Barea, which is an NBA player, and he said arroz con pollo. Like, how stupid do you think we are? And you say, like, arroz con pollo, which is, of course, rice. It's a Puerto Rican meal here. And he went to a panaderia, a bakery, and ate a sandwich on medianoche with Alejandro Garcia Padilla, a former governor, and it's just to take a picture. And of course, some people applaud that. Oh my God, they're eating together with the president, because colonialism is a dangerous thing. But to me, that's of course quite insulting. So what I say, and I believe not alone, because I'm not alone in this, but I really took it to heart to distinguish our national struggle, and from those people that believe like us in many left-wing policies, but that they really don't care about the colonial situation. And I've seen it not only in American circles, but also in Puerto Rico. One of those, another reason perhaps I didn't state why I joined more officially the Puerto Rican Independence Party in 2016, was because with all this going on, I had people that were organizing politically, and many people who organize politically through nonprofit institutions that then either are satellite of bigger institutions in the US. And you could say the same problem with unions, right? Imagine a union. Well, we might coalesce, and we might have a lot in common, but you could also see how our interest, especially this one, might not necessarily be the same. You could think about Spain, right? You could have party like Podemos or people but when it comes to Catalunya, then the issue gets muddier, right? It's complicated. Same thing happens here. But I believe, and we're in the Puerto Rican Independence Party, very open and very eager to have a respectful decisions, just like we did back then when when people were talking about in the 60s of other struggles, and we had to talk like people, or explain with very respect, people like Jesse Jackson and other figures very big at the time, because the solution is not to say, well, they're Americans like us. That's not the point. We have to deal with the matter in a more complex form. And I just, we look very, very with good eyes what something that AOC did recently with Nidia Velázquez, which Nidia Velázquez had always been a very pro Democratic Party and very pro Commonwealth, and they filed a bill that is going nowhere. Really, it's going nowhere. Just like we know the results of this referendum are going nowhere now. We don't. We're not saying that it's going to be different, but again, one has to decide what to do with these issues politically. But she filed a bill in order to create the Asamblea Constitucional de Estatus. And one might say, well, why did she do that? Well, that's what the Puerto Rican Independence Party has been advancing for 70 years, right? So it's not insignificant. Maybe not now, but maybe later. We here have been talking about a universal healthcare program when everybody here said that was communist. Esa cosa de cubano, right? Now, a lot of parties, including people like, and I'm not saying, of course, that Bernie can be, but I'm saying that people, even people like presidential candidates, serious presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, now says that, as a matter of fact. So one might take political stances that in the future are implemented. So we just try to use every opportunity that we have, and I do it personally, in order to discuss the Puerto Rican issues in a more diverse and from my point of view, correct way. Because from the other side, they're pushing with money. We talked about these Congress people, but there's also Darren Soto from Florida, which of course have filed, and the resident commissioner here, who have filed bills to make Puerto Rico an incorporated territory. That's something else, or to grant statehood in. So they're pushing, right? And even I, as an independentista, which we believe as a matter of collective right to self-determination, what we're saying is let's deal with the issue really, right? Let's do it really, because what cannot keep happening, what we cannot have, is a political status under which Congress has plenary powers, and we're literally subjects of that power with no real political power. That's what has to change, and we, of course, in that change, favor the national sovereignty that independence brings.
Well, on that note, Andres, I want to talk a little bit more about the specific parties, the two dominant parties that control Puerto Rican politics. Of course, those of us from the continental United States are very familiar with the two-party dictatorship. And as in the United States, these two parties are really similar. So can you talk about the New Progressive Party, which is also a hilarious name, by the way, for a right-wing party?
It's neither new, neither progressive, and as to a party, I don't know. It's it's a conglomerate of corrupts, and that's what they are.
Well, and in addition to the New Progressive Party, there's the Popular Democratic Party, the PPD. What differences do you see between these two parties? And then also in terms of their representatives, the current governor from the New Progressive Party, Wanda Vázquez, who, as you mentioned, is not elected. She's close to Trump, and she's also a member of the U.S. Republican Party, so very right-wing. But do you see many differences between her and the previous governor, Ricardo or Ricky Rosselló, who was forced out last year in the protests? Rhetorically, I mean, rhetorics aside, in terms of their policies, do you see significant differences between these two?
I'd like to give your audience, the most sincere, thoughtful response that I can. I don't want to, as we say here, politiquear, right? Like, they're the same. But honestly, when you say big differences, there are none. Let's take it, one step at a time. Historically, the Popular Democratic Party, right? It came. We talked about Luis Muñoz. We talked about the 30s, right? But Luis Muñoz Marín, the great founder, some might say, like, the padre de la patria. They're crazy, right? To us, he's like Benedict Arnold, the biggest traitor. So when it was created, the Popular Democratic Party, and he took power over in the 40s, then came everything, the Commonwealth, and they were the la hegemonía. They controlled everything in Puerto Rico. That party. It was initially even the slogan came from the Soviets. They used pan, tierra y libertad, which is a variation of the slogan of the Soviets. And it was a progressive mount here. We had a governor imposed by FDR, which was Rexford Tugwell. And with the New Deal and such, they put a lot of money into the infrastructure, and Puerto Rico changed. Then they switched, and they first abandoned independence immediately during the mid 40s, right, in favor of and they have been the biggest supporters of the Commonwealth into even a crazy in a crazy way, right? So they favor they are the most colonialist, but they've also turned right in when it comes to economic policy, and all through the years. I mean, I think they were pretty much the only government in the world, one of the few that actually passed resolutions in favor of the Vietnam War, because when you're a colony, I mean, you have to do everything in order to appease your metropolitan. That's the way it works. So, and with the economic policies, they're all capitalists. One can't say, even without laughing, that they would be socialists or center left. The Popular Democratic Party may have had some center left, but they have been buying into the neoliberal agenda and privatizations for decades. New Progressive Party arose out of a referendum. The Luisa Ferrer, their founder, did not belong to another statehood party that didn't want to participate in the 1967 plebiscite, but he said, well, let's participate. And they had the results, even though they didn't win, but he became an important figure and created the New Progressive Party. And they are more apologetically a right-wing party, but again, statehood is their best thing. They're also capitalist, very immediately the anti-communist forces, and especially you have to understand that during that time we had a lot of influx from Cubans, from right-wing Cubans. More than everybody talks about Florida, everybody talks about Miami, but we are like culturally more like Cuba, and we received that, but nobody talks about us. So that all got into they took control of the media here. They immediately not infiltrated, but became part of the New Progressive Party, right? So they're right wing, but economically they're indistinguishable. One might say lately, especially, that, for example, the New Progressive Party has taken more control of religious groups, the religious rights, evangelical groups, and yes, perhaps they appeal more. But that's not to say that the Popular Democratic Party has anything against it, or that is more, or that has defended more for equality. For example, just so people say, oh my God, how can you say that? Last term, the Popular Democratic Party that had the the governorship, as well as all the legislature, they could have passed a law in order to make the gay marriage legal. They didn't. And they waited for a Vergefell, for a court to decide, which is what they do always. I mean, they don't want to talk about abortion. If Roe v. Wade is overruled, which it might now probably will be with this, it's the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, the penal code here still criminalizes abortion. So even though it's that letra muerta, as we say, it's there. So these people and all parties both parties have done that. In many instances, when it comes especially to status, they're worse, because they don't want to deal with the issue. The other ones deal with the issue, politically, even though they don't take it that seriously, but as a way to move the issue. These guys will never want to participate in anything. Those are some differences, but economically, socially, nah. And yes, they try, because the New Progressive Party has gone, perhaps, yes, a little too far, too far to the right. But they sometimes try to appeal as if they're more diverse. But because I work in the legislature, I know their representatives, I know their people, and they don't want to. It's just a political. They know enough to say that they believe in in some things of gender, and some things that are important to what they believe is the left, but not enough to put it into action.
And in terms of the individual governors, do you see many differences between the current governor, Juan de Vázquez, and the previous governor, Ricky Rosselló, or Ricardo Rosselló? People might remember in 2019, There was a massive protest movement in what was called Telegram Gate. I mean, every time something happens, it's got a gate attached to it. But Telegram Gate, because these private messages were leaked between Ricky Rosselló and others, just, horrible messages in which he was making fun of the victims of Hurricane Maria and other just really odious messages. And he was forced to resign, and there was a lot of hope on the streets, but the unelected governor who replaced him is even more right-wing. So do you really see any change?
No, no. The truth is no. And again, a little perspective so that your people don't say that, oh, he doesn't like any of them. But why do I say this? First, Wanda Vasquez, she's been in political spheres in the New Progressive Party for a while. She was what we call Procuradora de la Mujer, women's I don't want to say procurator. She was Procuradora de la Mujer. She didn't do a good job, and feminist groups here, have stated so. Later, she was our Secretaria de Justicia, sort of Attorney General. While all these corruption cases were going on, she did absolutely nothing. Not only did she do nothing, that unfortunately something that we've had to deal with here in Puerto Rico, especially sad for a person from the independentista point of view. Our government's incapable of handling these corruption cases, and then the federal government comes and prosecutes these corrupt politicians in our faces. But it's also that's the problem of the people that we've elected. She did nothing while all this was going on, and so she got into power because we had so Rosselló, before being expelled, the Secretary of State had also resigned, right? And constitutionally, he would have been the successor. But because of many reasons, the candidate now, Pedro Pierluisi, which is the New Progressive Party candidate for this upcoming election Tuesday, so he tried to actually, it was a small coup. But I don't like to say coup because in order to have a coup, you need an actual state, not a colony. But it was a kind of a soft coup. And he was supposedly governor for 5 days before the Puerto Rican Supreme Court said, well, you can't do this because you weren't confirmed by the Senate officially before becoming Secretary of State. So you cannot be governor. That's crazy. Well, that happened. So because of that, and Wanda Vasquez, which was the actual person with the right to succeed, she did nothing. And that triangle where we were all in the streets trying to, take them all out, ended up with her being the governor. But her policies are the same. She first presented, well, I'm no politician because I was, I'm a lawyer. I was Secretaria de Justicia, right? But she came into power. The policies are the same. And, we saw it because now she campaigned in a primary for the New Progressive Party. And it's the same. You can't say through any of these people that they might be more left or better. Their political and especially economic policies are indistinguishable. The only thing that distinguishes both parties is the status issue, but that's not always an issue. And it's going to be, although through this process, how politics is, now Rosselló was with her, but since he was also with Pedro Pierluisi and they had a primary, now Rosselló is not with her, and now nobody likes her, and because she lost, she's not endorsing him, even though Pierluisi, which is from her own party. So there's a lot of personal resentment, but ideologically, if one analyzes this issue, one cannot honestly say that they differ in a lot of the things that matter.
Well, those of us in the continental United States are certainly no strangers to having a political system in which you have two parties which are basically identical on most issues that matter, most important issues for average working class people. And of course, we've seen for the past two presidential campaigns, the Democratic Party just viciously attack anyone mildly on the left, sabotaging, destroying the campaigns of Bernie Sanders, and telling us that there's really no hope, that the only possibility is voting for a center-right Democrat who shares most of the same policies with Trump. Of course, I'm talking about Biden. So now the choices are between two senile old racists who want to bomb the world. And it's pretty depressing, but I think a lot of us on the left in the United States and in other countries, I think that's why we have looked toward countries in Latin America and national liberation movements. Of course, the vast majority of these have been socialist and communist and left-wing. And I think they're not only kind of beacons of hope for the left, but they also provide a lot of lessons. They're guiding lights in terms of what the left and the global north can learn from the successful struggles of the left and the global south. You know, I live in Nicaragua, where the Sandinista revolution is renowned around the world, and the Sandinistas have governed democratically. Also, of course, people talk about the Cuban Revolution, the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. We have been reporting in Bolivia on the successful socialist transformation there. And now we just saw in Chile a historic referendum to rewrite the Pinochet-era dictatorship constitution, which is a totally neoliberal right-wing constitution. An election is coming up in Ecuador, and it's likely the left-wing candidate who is allied with the former progressive president Rafael Correa. He's probably going to win the election. His name is Arauz. So I think across Latin America, there's a lot of hope for the left. And it makes sense that people in Puerto Rico and the independence movement would look toward Latin America because they're left-wing, and they wouldn't look toward the US where the left has absolutely no power. So can you talk about what your perspective is on regional politics and regional integration with Latin America? Because I think most politicians in Puerto Rico look toward the United States politically, but I think the independence movement has a different perspective. So what's your take?
Definitely, I agree with that completely. And when one looks at the history of Puerto Rico and our movements and Latin America, that has been the case. And why? It's understandable first because for many decades, as you know very well, and you have described many of the movements in Latin America, um, the U.S. did whatever they wanted with governments in Latin America, right? And many of them were puppets, and of the US, and of course those that tried not to be or that were not were substituted by the US government and the CIA with local right-wing groups and taken over by military dictatorships. And that happened in Argentina, in Chile, everywhere, very well. Again, because we've mostly, especially since the 70s, the, let's say, organized, all organized Puerto Rican pro-independence movements here have been quite progressive. I really can't say, you know, otherwise. Even if one might believe, and it's perfectly, understandable why that there might be right-wing people who believe, in independence, but the movement has never, for the past 50 or more years, been organized that way. And some people say here, oh, you have such great candidates. I actually believe in independence, which is false. But they say I believe in independence, but I don't understand why you are all with the Cubans and with the Venezuelan. And I say, like, regardless of my personal views, policy wise with any country, I say, like, so no other government, either European, Latin American, North American, whatever, would not even sit with us, discuss the matter, talk about Puerto Rico. And those governments that, actually, like Fidel Castro said, that with mientras haya un puertorriqueño independentista, él defenderá la independencia, right? As long as there's one Puerto Rican that believes in independence, he will support independence. Or Chavez, or any other government, ¿verdad? The old PRI in Mexico, or the old, so we're not supposed to talk to them. It's comical. And but not only that, it's just we support, and because
you're not supposed to talk to them who, just from a geopolitical, geographic perspective, are your neighbors. They're right next to you. Instead, you're supposed to have way more in common with, like, California or Washington State, which is like thousands of miles away.
Yeah, or Kennedy or Nixon or Hillary Clinton or something. But not only that, but the truth is also that as an independence movement, we are open and have always been to other governments, as long as it's not a military dictatorship, of course, right? But under some recognizable or form of democracy, or even if you're not a socialist or something, as long as you're willing to talk and you might help us and understand our struggle, because it was yours. It is yours. We're the unfinished business, as Simón Bolívar said, right? We were a part of the process of José Martí and the Cubans. So we just got lost in the way, right? So we've always seen it that way. And before, people said, like, well, here again with colonialism, people say república as something bad. Oh, una de esas repúblicas, one of those republics, very and also patronizing and ignorant, as if, oh, you want to be like those republicas in Latin America, as if, first the US weren't a republic, or as if now we were better than many Latin American countries that have taken control of their institutions and have, with those powers, moved either right or left as they wished. And now they have while we're bankrupt, with a control board and with all our issues, many Latin American nations have gone the other way, right? And especially the ones you stated. So the fact that la Organización de Estados Americanos, right, the Organization of American States, and that many other institutions now, or I mean, it's not so influential, or that they are other counter, we have left-wing groups democratically taking power in Latin America, as it happened at the beginning of the century, and then the wave, the tide perhaps changed, and now we're coming back. It's very good. We hope that that again helps us, bring forward the discussion, because they're going to keep saying, well, you're a minority and this and that, it doesn't matter. But as our candidate for governor, Juan Dalmau, and our leader of our party, states, we here have always been deemed, how do I say it? We've always been deemed, as in a bad manner, as separatistas, right? We're separatists. We wanna leave. No, we want to join the world, right? Including, having any arrangements with the United States. Right now, we don't have to be a colony. There are free trade agreements, either good or bad. Again, demerits or something else. But with the United States, and of course we have, the other sorts of arrangements in Europe and other places. You don't have to cede your sovereignty or your cultural identity or whatever in exchange for some federal programs or anything else, right? We're in 2020 now. So with the advent of these more progressive groups, just like I talked about more progressives in the United States that I want to talk to, I would definitely, we would definitely benefit from that solidarity that has always been part of our struggle. And when our leaders, many of them, Albizu Campos, but many throughout history, had to leave because of repressions, they sometimes landed in the Dominican Republic or Cuba or other places that would have the will, right, the maturity and the strength in order to accept us, because that had consequences with regard to the US, right? It's and not now, but during the 60s, during the 50s, the 80s, the 90s, to take those positions was not easy for a government, from a Latin American country. But we see it as a regional struggle, and definitely with more progressive governments in Latin America. And even if not, because for example, Cuba and other places, even before the revolution, and even when they did not have more progressive governments, they understood what European and American colonialism is. So even some other governments have taken stance with regard to Puerto Rico. And I remember in 2006, we had a Congress in favor of Puerto Rican independence in Panama, and people from all over Latin America supported that. So we definitely see it as a good omen to us, in our advantage, not as a trick, but in order to advance what we believe is our right to self-determination, and finally to end colonialism.
Well, we have been speaking with Andrés González Berdecía from the Puerto Rican Independence Party. He is a senatorial candidate, and along with his colleague from Radio Independencia, Adriana Gutierrez Colon. They're both senatorial candidates. So I would highly recommend, again, for people who speak Spanish, check out their radio program, Radio Independencia. And finally, to conclude here, Andrés, for people who are watching or listening who are Puerto Rican, how can they vote for the Puerto Rican Independence Party in the upcoming election?
Yeah, so we're actually, Adriana and I are candidates for the Senate in the San Juan district, right? So if you reside in San Juan, Aguas Buenas, and part of Guaynabo, 3 cities here, municipalities here, then you have a right to vote for us. And I would urge you to, of course, to do so, and this upcoming Tuesday, and to support the Puerto Rican Independence Party. First, if you favor independence. Second, if you favor, progressive policies that we've discussed here. And even if not, if you're tired of corruption and, incompetence in government, I think we would do a better job. I definitely know that we would do a better job, and we wouldn't go there in order to get money for ourselves. So that's what I urge you to, and to follow us. If you want to look us up, you can go to ocupemoselsenado.com and you can look us up in Radio Independencia and all social media. We've been exploiting that. So I definitely urge you to look us up and give us the opportunity.
And also, your party, the Puerto Rican Independence Party, has a candidate for governor, Juan Dalmau. Can you talk about who he is?
Yeah, I mean, Juan Dalmau's right. He's currently a senator, and he's been with the party, for many years. We're very excited about his campaign. We cannot understate that. I got into this, and as your audience can see, I'm very passionate about these topics. This is important to me, and I would have been, open to having this campaign and to helping and supporting the party in any way, even if the future looked grim, one might say. But but we have expectations, bigger expectations now, and because I cannot, and again, honesty, perhaps in maybe 20 years or more, there hasn't been this sort of support for a candidate from the independence movement. We in the young people and even old people alike, they seem to like Juan Dalmau. He's a great person, and he's a progressive. He's part, he's part of us, right? He's part of our party. But he's been well received by many in Puerto Rico. He's been, I don't want to say he's turned into a star, because that's not, that's not possible. But we've been criticized many years for perhaps being too academic, which I think is kind of unfair, but whatever, right? But they're too academic, or they're too whatever.
Which, when they say that, I mean, it just means, they're smart. Unlike basically all other politicians, they shouldn't be smart.
Yeah, but they say that all the time. They're just too smart, and another one. And I'm sure people will hear this show and say, "Oh, another lawyer, another Eric." It comes with the territory. But for many reasons, this campaign has been differently, and he has been different, and he's been perceived and received in another light, right? And hopefully, I'm sure that it will translate in the election, and we will have a great result, and hopefully with the victory. But for us, this is we fight and we do everything in order to win the election, right? That's our main goal. We don't do anything less than any other party. I believe we do anything more. We do more. But we're not just a party. We organize. We have people and committees all over Puerto Rico, and I'm very excited about what's going to happen in this upcoming election, but in the future also, because we can't stop there, and we will stop when Puerto Rico is independent, and when we will be organized in a progressive party that status aside, and we can make sure that Puerto Rico becomes a republic, but a free country with progressive policies, and not a neo-colony, right, subordinated to economic interest.
All right. Well, we were speaking with Andrés González Berdecía from the Puerto Rican Independence Party. You can support his program Radio Independencia at patreon.com/Radio Independencia. You can support our work at patreon.com/Grayzone. Y Andrés, mil gracias por compartir, mil gracias por hablar con nosotros. Hasta luego, gracias.
Gracias a ti, gracias a ustedes. Thank you.